Okay, so how did African countries get their names? I mean, who decided that Kenya should be called Kenya? Why does Eritrea sound so poetic? And what's Djibouti in Djibouti? Why does Ethiopia sound so ancient and mysterious? Well, in this video, we're going to be diving into the fascinating stories of how East African countries got their names. And trust me, they're anything but boring. In fact, they are so riveting that by the end of this video, you'll be dropping a lot of these fun facts in your next dinner party. Let's go. East Africa is a region rich in history, culture, and diversity. But the names of these countries are like time capsules, holding secrets of the past. Let's start with Kenya. Kenya is named after Mount Kenya, the second highest peak in the continent. But here's the kicker. The mountain's name comes from the Kikuyu word Kirinyaga, which means place of brightness. So when the British colonists arrived, they found it difficult to pronounce Kirinyaga. So they called it Kenya, and Kirinyaga became Kenya. Now here's a fun fact regarding this name. Remember, the Kikuyus named this place Kirinyaga, meaning place of brightness. They literally believed that their god, Ngai, lived on top of this mountain. In other words, Kenya's name is actually divine. Next is Tanzania. Now let's talk about Tanzania. You see, this name is a mashup of two territories, Tanganyika and Zanzibar. Now, Tanganyika itself is a mashup of two words, Tanga and Nyika. Tanga means to sail, and Nyika means wilderness. In other words, Tanganyika is the Swahili word for to sail in the wilderness. Zanzibar, on the other hand, is the Arabic word for Zanzibar, which means coast of black people. Now, when these two territories of Tanganyika and Zanzibar came together in 1964 to form a country, they borrowed from their various names and came up with the name Tanzania, which means the land of the Tanganyikas and the Zanzibar people. So the name Tanzania symbolizes unity, diversity, and strength. Next up is Uganda. Now, the name Uganda is actually derived from the kingdom of Buganda, which was the most powerful kingdom at the time the British arrived. Now, when the British came, they called the entire territory in that region Uganda. That's from the Swahili word of Buganda, and the territory became known as Uganda, or royalty, because the kings of Uganda were called Uganda. So the name Uganda is actually a shout out to royalty, or Uganda's royal roots. The next country you must have heard about, it's a very tiny country, but it's quite popular. It's called Rwanda. Now, the name Rwanda comes from the Kenya-Rwanda word Kwanda, which means to expand. Legend has it that the country's founder, Gihanga, expanded his territory continuously, and that's how the name got to stick. But aside that, Rwanda is also known as the land of 1,000 hills. Next up is Burundi, the twin sister or brother of Rwanda. Now, Burundi's name is equally fascinating. It comes from the Kirundi word Uburundi, which means land of the Rundi people. So the Rundis actually got a country named after them because Burundi means land of the Rundi people. Next country on the list is the legend itself, Ethiopia, the home of coffee. Now, Ethiopia is not only the most populated country in East Africa, it's actually the second most populated country in Africa. She is one of the oldest countries in the world and is the only African country, well, if you exclude Liberia, not to be colonized, not to be conquered and colonized by the West. So how did Ethiopia get its name? Ethiopia got its name from the Greek word Ethiopia, which means land of burnt faces. You see, the Greek used this to describe the people who lived south of Egypt, who had darker skin. But Ethiopians themselves tell a different story. According to the Ethiopian legends, the name Ethiopia comes from their word Ethiopia, which is the name of the son of Cush, a biblical legend. In other words, Ethiopians insist that they were named after the son of Cush, whose name was Ethiopia. So Ethiopia has an ancient and proud heritage that dates back centuries, even beyond biblical times, when they were formerly known as Abyssinia. Next is Eritrea. Eritrea's name comes from the ancient Greek word Eritrea Thalassa, which just means Red Sea. So because of its location, along the Red Sea, when the Greeks came, they called her Eritrea Thalassa, which means Red Sea. And when they were colonized subsequently afterwards by the Italians themselves, also based on this location, called her Eritrea. So Eritrea technically means Red Sea. But there's another kicker. The locals interpret Eritrea to mean land of the free because they had to fight for their independence from Ethiopia for 30 years. And when they got their independence, Eritrea to them became land of the free. Next up is Sudan. You see, the name Sudan comes from the Arabic phrase Bilad as-Sudan, which means land of black people. And it refers to the vast area of land south of the Sahara Desert, which is inhabited by diverse African ethnic groups. So Sudan is literally Arabic for black people. So next country is South Sudan. Now, this one is pretty straightforward. It says South Sudan. That means it's south of Sudan. You see, in 2011, South Sudan broke away from Sudan and became the youngest country in Africa, not just in Africa, but the world. So whilst Sudan means land of black people, South Sudan means black people who live south of Sudan, basically. So South Sudan's name is derived from its location. Next up is Djibouti. Now, the name Djibouti has nothing to do with booty. But there are two theories as to the origin of its name. The first is Afar is the major tribe in Djibouti. And the Afars have a type of palm woven mat which they call gabuti, which is usually used in traditional ceremonies. And the second theory as to the origin of the name is the Somali word Djibouti, meaning the plateau of the land. So Djibouti's name reflects its cultural diversity and its strategic location as a gateway between Africa and the Middle East. Now let's head to Somalia. The name Somalia comes from the Somali people who make up the majority of the tribe in the country. According to Somali legends, the name Somalia derived from the Somali phrase Su Mal, which means go and milk, and is a reference to the pastoral nature of the Somali people. So Somalia practically means land of the Somalis. So next up are the islands of Seychelles and Comoros. Let's start with Comoros. Now, Comoros is an archipelago in the Indian Ocean, and its name comes from the Arabic word Kama, which means moon. The islands are generally known as the islands of the moon, perhaps because of their crescent shape, like the moon, or because of their moonlit landscapes. Comoros, as a name, is a nod to its Arabic and Swahili influences. And finally, Seychelles. Now, Seychelles is actually named after the French finance minister under King Louis XV, called Jean Moreau de Seychelles. So when in the 18th century the French claimed this island, they named her after this French minister, and not the king, interestingly. However, there's a twist. The Seychelles people themselves have their own Creole name for the country, and they call her Cecil. So there you have it, the hidden names to the East African countries, from ancient Greek references to pastoral traditions, from peoples indigenous to the land to mountains, from locations to mashups. So these names were more than just labels. They were windows into history, culture, and identity. That's it.